Thanks to the organizers, Nikhil and Liat, and also thanks to the organizers of the entire program. It's been great so far. So this talk is about kidney exchange markets, and surprisingly, this is the first talk on kidney exchange. So I'm going to have to start with giving you some backgrounds on kidney exchange. I'll be very brief because I'm guessing most of you already know the background. And once I'm done with that, then I will talk about our main research question, which is concerned with the following, which is concerned with basically the question of can we improve the efficiency of kidney exchange markets by thickening the market. And I'll be more precise what I mean by thickening once we actually get to this. Right? So let's start. Oh, and what I'm going to tell you is basically based on 3 papers. I will mainly focus on this more recent one, but I will also touch upon the results from the first. So let's start with like a brief overview of kidney exchange markets and what they actually do. So a little bit background about kidney transplants. For most patients, not for many patients that suffer from kidney failure, receiving a transplant is the preferred treatment because it improves their quality of life and also it reduces their mortality risk. Also from the society's perspective, receiving a transplant is actually very cost efficient, right? So we save a lot of money each time a patient gets off dialysis and actually receives a transplant. So given this, it's not surprising and it's widely known that we have a severe shortage of kidneys. Many people are waiting. Many people unfortunately die while they are waiting for a transplant. And the reason is that the supply, we are short in supply. So the supply comes from other humans and basically comes from donations. We have 2 types, deceased donations and live donations. Now, kidney exchange is related to live donations. Let's see how that works. If a patient needs a kidney, in most part of the world except for Iran, he cannot buy a kidney. So he needs to find a loved one to basically donate the kidney. And many people actually do find someone, but that donor, that intended donor, is not biologically compatible with the patient, so they cannot go through with the transplant. Now, in this case, what this pair can do is to find another pair with a similar situation, but now they are cross-compatible. And if this coincidence of once actually happens, these 2 pairs can exchange the kidney of their donors, and you're going to have 2 basically happy patients. Right? So that's just the basic idea behind like a 2-way kidney exchange. And of course, whenever there's need for exchange, markets emerge naturally. So that's what has happened in the US in the past 20 years. We have multiple regional programs that each one works with a subset of hospitals and transplant centers to basically form these pools of incompatible patients and donors, and in those pools basically search for exchanges. Nowadays, about 14% of living donation actually goes through these exchange programs. Right, so it's doing pretty well in the US, and now many other countries have also adopted this solution, and they have their own national kidney exchange programs. All right, now let's see what happens in a kidney exchange market. You can pretty much expect, it's pretty much what you would expect. Pairs arrive over time, and they, by and large, prefer to be matched as soon as they can. And once a bunch of pairs arrive, then you're going to form like a compatibility graph. So each node is going to be a pair of patient-donor. There is a directed edge between, let's say, pair 6 and pair 3, if donor of pair 6 can give to patient of pair 2. Right? Now, as you can see, I have one special kind of node here, which is like an altruistic donor. So this is a very generous person who just donates his kidney without wanting one back. All right? And this is extremely helpful because it can start a chain of exchanges. Right? Good. So once we have this compatibility graph, a centralized planner is going to now make matching decisions. So the centralized planner is going to find matches, basically match the patients to compatible donors using short cycles or chains. So in this little example, we can basically clear the market in the following way. So you're going to have a two-way here, you have a three-way exchange here, and also you have a short chain segment here. Right, notice that we clean the market, and also we are left with one extra donor at the end of this segment. Now, this donor can later donate to someone else. So kind of a better picture of how this chain advances is something like that. All right, so this can go on for quite a while. And the record that we have is 30 transplants. So one altruistic donor donated his kidney, and that resulted in 30 patients basically receiving the transplant. Right, so it's quite helpful. These non-directed donors and this idea of chains is actually quite impactful.
But the final person who didn't donate yet is not obligated to donate later.
No, that's a very good question, but usually people do. And the way that they close chains is that usually someone who is waiting for a deceased allocation becomes urgent, and that donor has been waiting, for example, for a month to donate, and they could not continue that chain. So they basically end the chain by giving that kidney to a person who is waiting for a deceased allocation. But we don't see much reneging. It's like a very few percentage. All right, good. So again, this was just like very quick summary of how kidney exchange markets work. Basically, all they do is they organize for these exchanges. Now, they are, of course, very impactful markets. They save lives, but we also know that they are not efficient, in the sense that still patients wait quite a long time in these markets. And one reason that is thought of to be as a reason for this inefficiency is the fact that these markets are thin, meaning that there are not many matching opportunities. So what we want to study is that can we thicken this market, and if we manage to do that, does that improve efficiency? Now, how are we going to thicken the market? We're going to try two different ideas. First one is match infrequently. Okay? So if I wait between match runs, a bunch of new pairs are going to arrive. I'm going to have a bigger pool, and maybe in a bigger pool, I can make smarter matching decisions. Right? Seems like a reasonable idea. Let's see this in a quick example. Say I have this is my market today. If I want to do a match today, best I can do is that kind of break this time at random. Let's say I go with this one. In that case, if tomorrow a pair 4 arrives, who is now only can do a two-way with pair 3, then I kind of made a big mistake, right? If I waited one extra day, then I could basically clear the market. So there is reason to believe that thickening the market this way is going to improve efficiency, right? So that's one idea. Second idea to try is to just increase participation, right? Bring more people to these programs, and that's going to make your market thicker. How are we going to increase participation? There are different ideas and discussions that are going on in order to make this happen. One is the idea of basically incentivize different exchange programs to collaborate with each other and basically merge their pools. So that's one idea. Second one is incentivize hospitals to fully participate. So we do have evidence that hospitals do not fully participate, and they hide some of their pairs. So maybe we can come up with some incentive schemes that make them participate fully.
Sorry, what do they gain by hiding? What do they gain by hiding information?
They can match internally within their hospitals, their own pairs.
Which is fine. Oh, but you won't get a thick market outside.
Yeah, exactly. Right, and kind of a last ambitious idea is to bring compatible pairs. So right now, compatible pairs just match with each other. There's a direct donation. They don't participate in the exchange programs, but maybe we can bring them in by promising them, let's say, a better match and also a very quick match. So that would be another way of increasing participation. Right? So this idea is feasible. This idea is also feasible. Let's see if they are actually helpful. So here's my punchline. First idea is not helpful. If you match infrequently, you're not going to improve efficiency. And this is kind of a robust result. Second idea, increasing participation. Again, it's not clear that's going to always going to be helpful. It's going to basically depend on the characteristics and parameters of your pool. Now, why are we getting this kind of not counterintuitive results? Basically, the reasoning behind these results hinge on the kind of particular characteristics of the compatibility structure. In particular, the compatibility structures are heterogeneous and they are sparse. And these two factors result in having these behaviors. Right now, let me show you evidence of heterogeneity and sparsity. So let's start with heterogeneity. So here, what I'm showing you is some biological measure. We don't need to get into the details of that. The way that we're going to read this histogram is that this gives us a level of tissue type compatibility, which is one of the main factors in compatibility of a patient and a donor. So as you can see, we have some patients on this side, and those are the ones that are very easy to match, meaning that if you give me a random donor, they are very likely to be compatible with that donor. We also have lots of patients on this side, and these are hard to match. So they are very unlikely to actually be compatible with a random donor.
Sorry, what's the x-axis?
So x-axis is just like some biological measure that goes from 0 all the way to 100. But the way to read it is that if I'm, let's say, at 99, it means that I have 1% chance of being matched to a random donor. Right? So I didn't go to the details. Okay? Yes?
What are the 3 bars?
The 3 bars. I will explain it just in a second. Right? So 2 observations. First, of course, there's a great level of heterogeneity here, and this distribution looks kind of bimodal. And the second one, going to Federico's question, basically the distribution we get is different for different programs. So here I'm showing you the histogram for 3 different programs. These are kind of the main players in the US: NKR, MSA, and APD. And as you can see, there is quite a bit of variation in the percentage of hard and easy that each of these pairs get. Right? Did I answer this one? Good. Right, now let's see with this kind of compatibility structure, what kind of graphs are we getting? So here's just one example of a compatibility graph. Each circle is just one pair, and directed edges are defined as you would expect. As you can see, I have these blue nodes in the middle that have a lot of incoming edges. So these are the easy to match pairs. And also I have a sea of these white nodes that have very few incoming edges. So 1, 2, or 0 for many of them. Okay? So it's kind of like an evidence of a sparse and heterogeneous graph. Right now, with this evidence in mind, now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to set up a stylized model, which basically captures these features. And using our stylized model, now we're going to go back and study the questions about thickening. Here's our model. So we're going to look at an infinite horizon stochastic model. And in our model, there are 2 types of pairs. Hard to match pairs, we show them by H. Easy to match, we show them by E. Each type arrives with its own arrival rate and also its corresponding compatibility probability. Now, in order to capture hard versus easy, we are going to assume pH is much smaller than P. So let's take an example of the pool dynamics. Let's say this is your current pool, and E pair arrives. It's going to form an incoming edge with any of the nodes already in the pool independently and with a probability that depends on the type of the receiving agents. Okay? So here this is an H pair, so we're going to have this edge with probability pH. This is E, so I have probability P. Now, these are the outgoing edges from these new arriving pairs. We also form incoming edges in a similar way. Every node here independently forms an edge with probability P. So this is how the pool actually gets formed. And the last piece of model primitives is that we also have D altruistic donors. Now, we are going to fix our matching policy to be a myopic policy, meaning that every time someone shows up, I'm going to try to form a match. And we're going to look at two types of matchings, bilateral and chain matching. And for both types, we're going to break ties in favor of H pairs and random among within a type.
So, quick question. Algorithmically, you can find the longest path in your graph. I agree. But what you really want is the fewest paths that cover the most number of vertices.
What?
The fewest minimum number of chains that cover the most number of patient-donor pairs.
Why would that be better than like a maximum?
All of those, you can execute each of those chains, and you can maximally do kidney exchanges in that graph.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So once we
These are all getting hard problems, right?
yeah. So like we are, of course they use heuristic. Here we are not solving them actually. This is a stylized work, but in real world they solve some versions of a traveling salesman problem, but they use some heuristic, so it's not like it's not solved to exactly. Yeah. Yeah. D is the number of altruistic donors, that basically the number of chains you can form.
So you start off with D and then you're doing infinite rotation?
Yeah. So like, let's say I start with, at time 0, I have D altruistic donors, and they're going to keep running the chains. I'm never ending the chains. Right. I want to make two comments about this matching policy. First one is that you may ask, if chains are wonderful, why are you studying bilateral matching? And the reason is that not every exchange program is using chains, simply because not every exchange program has access to altruistic donors. So we need to also understand bilateral matching. And the second comment I wanted to make is that there are some details in chain matching in the way that segments of chains are formed. I'm not giving it here. We'll discuss it more when we actually get to the chains. Yes?
Naive biology question. So here you're focusing within pairs that are compatible in terms of blood type.
Yes.
And then is it the case that the hardness of the tissue type compatibility depends only on the patient, not on the donor?
In reality, it does depend on both, but this measure of PRA, it's a probability when the donor is chosen at random. It gives me some sense of how hard to match a particular patient is. But in practice, if you give me a donor and a patient, I need to check them biologically to see if they're actually compatible.
I guess this question is like, if I'm hard to match, does it mean that there's an equal chance that my donor will be matched with somebody else as the donor of an easy to match?
Yes, they're independent. Right now, all the compatibilities are just patient-based.
Just to follow,
Yeah.
When you say a pair here, which arrives, it's a man and his wife, and which one is hard or easy? It's just the one who needs the transplant? Or
Yes, very good.
The other one you don't mind about the compatibility of the donor?
Yes. So let's think of this way. Donors are kind of homogeneous. Patients are heterogeneous. So they are hard or easy, right? But they arrive in pairs. Okay? Good. Any other question about the model? Right, very good. So with this matching policy, the efficiency metrics we're going to focus on is going to be the expected waiting time in steady state. Why are we focusing on this? In this market, people are indifferent among compatible, all of their compatible pairs. So they just want to be matched, and they want to be matched as quickly as possible. And the second thing is that notice I don't have a departure in my model. So if you join this pool, you are going to be matched. So the only sensible measure is to see how fast we can actually match. Right, and the one last thing, we're going to look at this expected waiting time in the limit as pH goes to 0, because that kind of simplifies some of the analysis. Yes?
What is the so the high types and low types are easy and hard arrive, but the algorithms don't. There's a fixed amount no matter what the time length is?
Yes, you're fixing them. That's kind of an approximation for letting them run to infinity. We actually check for the case that you can have Poisson arrival of the altruistic donors, but every chain ends at some point. Okay. Right now with this kind of theoretical setup, again, let me reiterate our goals. We want to know how far is the myopic policy from an optimal policy that can actually wait before matching people. And also we want to conduct comparative statistics on arrival rates, and that will tell us what is the impact of increasing participation. Right now, before moving on to the results, let me just spend one slide talking a little bit about the analysis. Yep.
I guess this has been bothering me a little bit. When you allow more arrivals into the system, you're still trying to minimize waiting time, but now for a larger group of people.
Yeah.
In some sense, like even if that got worse, it might be better overall depending on what was happening to those people before you grabbed them into the system.
So it depends on what they are doing right now. So let's say if I merge two pools, they can have better waiting time when the two pools were separate compared to when I merged them together.
Yeah,
so that can happen. But
people that were like
that were not being matched anywhere. Very good, very good. Yeah, that's definitely true. So we need to think about the outside options.
You have this probabilistic model, but when you show the data, different network has a very different characteristics.
So that is captured in the arrival rates, right? So both the ratio of the arrival rates and also the actual arrival rates are going to matter.
I mean, you showed 3 networks. One network has a lot of easy cases, and then, like, if it's a biological statistical phenomena, how does it?
Very good question. These are not unbiased samples from population. There are multiple reasons why there is bias in these samples. Good. So first trick that we use is we use Little's law, which allows us to relate the expected waiting time to the number of pairs in the pool. And that's very helpful because we can abstract away from time. We just work with a discrete Markov chain. So we basically, our goal in our analysis is to try to characterize the pool distribution. And this, of course, depends on both the matching policy and also the arrival rates. Once we are fixing the matching policy, we pretty much have a self-serving queuing system, right? Why is it self-serving? Because every pair is the customer and the server are paired together. And this is on some level related to Gideon's work and his co-authors and others that have this very nice line of papers that looks at bipartite matching of servers and customers. The big difference here is that in these works, the graph is fixed. Here, for us, the graph is probabilistic. Right, and last point, the main challenge in the analysis is that because we really want to model heterogeneity, we need to deal with two-dimensional Markov chains. And they're quite difficult to work with. So we use all kinds of tricks, mainly coupling them with one-dimensional chains, which are easier to analyze, and also use some tricks that allows us to compute the expected pool size without actually knowing the distribution. So all we can show is that this pool size is very well concentrated around its mean without actually knowing the distribution. Right. With this, let me jump right into the results. The first result says that among all Markovian matching policies, myopic policy achieves a waiting time which is order optimal. What does that mean? It means that it achieves the same scaling factor, because again, these are limit results. We are pushing pH to 0. And we are saying that myopic policy achieves the best scaling possible. Not necessarily the best constant, but the best scaling possible. speaking, what this says, roughly speaking, what this says is that matching without weighting is not harmful to the efficiency. Right? Now, of course, this is based on a really simplistic, stylized model. So you may not believe that this actually holds in practice. I want to show you some simulation results from our medical paper, which actually shows that this behavior actually does hold in practice. So here's one example. So in a paper published in American Journal of Transplantation, we use data, 10 years of data from 3 different exchange programs. We actually simulate this matching process using the actual biological factors. And we try to kind of be very faithful to the process in the sense that we include the departure rates, failure rates, the actually matching both using 2 ways, 3 ways, and chains, so all kinds of possibilities. And we, again, pretty much get the same result. So as you can see here, if we wait longer between match runs, the waiting time just gets worse and worse.
What about the number of matches?
Very good question. That's coming up on next slide. So this is one metric, average waiting time. In terms of the fraction of matched pairs, we actually get the same results. Right? So let's see what is the kind of high-level intuition behind this result.
Go back to the. What is the left one? The left picture?
So the left one is the fraction of matched. So in reality, we have departures. So if we wait between match runs, some people may depart. So it makes sense to look at what fraction of the pool we are actually matching at the end of the day. So this left graph gives us that. All right. So intuition. So the main reason behind this is pretty much sparsity. Let's see what happens if we actually decide to wait between 2 match runs. So the first observation here is that if you look at your residual graph, people who are already waiting in your pool, most of them, almost all of them are of type H, right? These are the guys that are going to accumulate in the pool just because they're hard to match. Now let's see what's going to happen in one match run. So let's say an E node can arrive. It can form 2 ways with some H's. Then let's say an H guy comes, nothing happens. Another E pair arrives, forms some more 2 ways. Now notice that because of sparsity, because this probability is very low, and because we have so many of these guys, the chance that I get a connected component between this guy and this guy is actually very small. Okay? Now, if I don't get, if this component and this one are not connected with each other, there's not much smart matching decisions I can do. There's no augmenting path in a disjoint, in a graph with disjoint components, right? And if there is no connection between this part and this part, there's no point in waiting, right? If I wait or not, I can do the same thing, which is just pick one of the edges at random from each of the components. Yes?
But in the simulation about the fraction of matches, it seemed to go down.
Yes, because that's a good question. Let's go back. Because if I wait a long time, people are going to leave. I'm not matching them, right? And I'm just waiting, so people are going to start leaving. So again, the main reasoning behind this is just sparsity. And before showing you other results, I want to just take a moment and discuss related work. So there has been quite a bit of activity in this area. This question of wait or not wait was first studied by Unver in 2010. He looked at a model with deterministic compatibilities, and he actually showed for most regimes you don't want to wait. Then in 2013, in our first paper, we arrived at the same conclusion, now for a model with a stochastic compatibility. And then subsequently, Akbarpur et al., Anderson et al., and more recently, Ashlock et al. Looked at infinite horizon models, different variations, single type, multi-type, with departure, without departure, all get the same results. Okay, so this is pretty robust if you have 0-1 compatibilities. Okay? When you bring edge weights or preferences, then this result is going to break. And you can show that not weighting is going to be suboptimal. And the two papers that I highlighted here are two examples of settings that actually show this. Yes?
Do you have any idea what's the minimum variance policy? Because, I mean, when you're looking at Little's law, this would be like saying last come, first serve, first come, first serve, you have the same waiting time. They have a huge difference in the variance. So in this case, is there like any sense of what's the minimum variance policy in terms of the waiting time, or is it just that there's some people waiting a lot, some people being served fast, waiting a fast application?
That's a very good question. I don't think that not waiting is actually is the minimum variance policy. You can probably kind of just count how long people wait and do prioritize based on that, and that's going to give you like a lower variance policy. But in terms of the expected waiting time, it's going to be the same. You can improve that by breaking ties in a smarter way. Good. Right, and the last thing I want to mention here is that, of course, weight versus not weight is not the only interesting policy questions. Many more interesting questions resulted in very nice papers. And we are fortunate to have many of the authors of those papers with us in the audience. Right, good. Now we know that myopic policies are almost optimal. We are happy with them. Let's characterize their waiting time so that we can conduct comparative statistics. And by the way, they are very close to what's happening in practice. So here in this theorem, we characterize the asymptotic waiting time, and we actually show a phase transition. So in the case that majority of pairs are of type E, we're going to get a waiting time which scales with 1/pH with a constant that depends on the arrival rates in a non-trivial way. Okay? On the other hand, if in the regime that the majority of patients are of type H, we're going to get a waiting time that scales with pH square, 1/pH square, so this is much larger, with a different constant. So using this, now we can conduct comparative statics. We actually show that in the first regime, as we increase lambda H, as we bring more H types to the market, the waiting time goes up. Even in the second regime, the waiting time goes up to a certain point, up to some lambda star, and after that it starts going down. Okay. For both regimes, though, we can show if you bring more E pairs, the easy to match ones, everyone is happier. Now let's see all this in just one graph. So here I'm showing you waiting time as a function of lambda H. I'm fixing lambda E to be 5. Lambda H goes from 0 to 50. Right? As you can see, in the first regime, waiting time increases, but it is still tiny compared to what happens in this regime. Here, the waiting time goes up, and at some point, it starts going down. Yes?
When you bring in more lambda H's, I guess following up on Nicole's question, like the question is what the outside option? Because if the outside option was not be in a registry and just wait without being in a registry, you shouldn't count the waiting time.
That's totally true, but what if your outside option is being internally matched within your hospital? Or if it's like not your pool not being merged with another pool, right? So
you're taking the most kind of like
this is just like a comparative statics. I'm just saying that in some way you are increasing lambda H, what's going to happen to the waiting time, right? If we want to think about outside options and stuff, we need to kind of model that and use this result to understand the impact of, let's say, merging some people who with a very bad outside option versus with, let's say, a pool.
Well, you're making some assumption about those about the outside option when you calculate.
I just like, let's say mechanically I can increase lambda H. I'm not saying what happens when I'm increasing lambda H, but like in expectation, what happens to the waiting? so this basically tells us that the impact of thickening depends on the current market composition. It's not always beneficial to bring more people to your market. Now, what's the high-level intuition behind this result? So in the first regime, when most pairs are of type E, almost all of the H pairs are going to be matched with the E ones. Okay, so you're going to have E to H bilateral matches. As a result of this, basically that's why you get a waiting time, which scales with 1 over pH. And also, as you bring more H pairs, as you bring more H pairs, yes, you are bringing more people to your market, but those people are not helping each other because they all want to get matched to the fixed set of E pairs. Okay? As a result of this, they kind of exert negative externality on each other, waiting time goes up. Now, if you move on to the second regime, in that case, just because we don't have enough E pairs, some of the H pairs need to match each other, right? As a result of this, we get this 1 over pH square. And now we have two conflicting forces. On one hand, if you bring more H pairs, they all again want to get matched to the same set of E's, so that's kind of a negative effect. But because some of them have to match each other, if you bring more of them, there will be more H to H matching opportunities, and that's going to be beneficial. Right? So that will give us such a non-monotone waiting time equilibrium. All right, now what's the implication of this? Very briefly, you can think about merging two programs. There's actually lots of activities going on in different countries to merge different programs, especially in Europe. And if you have two pools that have kind of similar composition, then you know that both markets are going to benefit because it's like pretty much you are just speeding up the process. Okay? But if it happens that two pools have different compositions, then one of the pools can actually be worse off. And this can happen in a non-trivial way. Let me show you an example. Let's say you are merging MSA, one of the programs in the US, with an arbitrary pool, with a pool with arbitrary lambda E and lambda H. So what I'm showing you in this heat map is the waiting time of MSA after merging minus before. Okay? So in all these parts, MSA benefits from merging with another pool. However, if you are below this border here, then MSA is going to be worse off after merging with another program. Just to give you like an hypothetical example, let's say if we merge MSA with APD, another program in the US, preserving their write ratios and arrival rates, MSA is going to actually be worse off.
The waiting time is for a particular policy, right? So.
Yeah, like just simply merge them together. I'm not saying that happens, but let's say hypothetically you just merge them and there's no differentiation between the two programs.
No, but what do you do to the policy, right? Because this is the waiting time increases or decreases, but for a particular policy.
Yes, for the bilateral policy that we've been discussing so far, yes. If you think about some priority schemes, it would be different.
But that's very close to the even, right?
That's very close to?
To no gain and no loss.
Yes. Yeah, you can bring it down. I just wanted to use like a real world example. All right, so again, you can say that, okay, this is not very surprising because APD has a worse ratio of H to E, so it has more H per E, so that may result in making MSA worse. But if I merge MSA with NKR, which is another program in the US, actually now MSA actually gains, even though NKR has a worse ratio of E to H, worse composition compared to MSA. And the reason is that NKR is so big compared to MSA that still it's going to help MSA. Right?
Are those real, like are you just making up like the labels for those points, or are those real kind of results?
Oh, by real you mean, so I am taking the actual arrival rates and composition of those two pools, right? But is that the question?
What does it mean, the real arrival rates and composition for those pools?
So I know how many H pairs and E pairs arrived to, let's say, NKR last year, okay? That gives me...
Blood type A, blood type B, like
right, let's say, yes. Let's say there's no blood type issue. Otherwise, you need to go to individual.
I'm trying to understand whether you suggest that if they really were to merge, like the gains would be exactly like you're doing on the slides, or just saying, I estimate some parameters.
No, I estimate.
This is not what really will happen, but this is illustrative.
This is illustrative, and actually I am kind of cheating here. This is a hypothetical example. I started with saying that because MSA uses two ways, but APD and NKR actually match mainly through chains. Okay, so this will not happen in practice. Again, it's a hypothetical example.
Okay.
But,
would not
yeah.
incentive compatibility be a constraint in your matching policy so that it does not
Very good, very good. Yes, definitely. So the point I'm trying to make is that when we think about, let's say, designing an incentive mechanism, we need to think about the compositions of different pools. Okay, not saying that this is a practical one. All right, good. Now, in the last few minutes, let me discuss our results about chain matching. First, as I promised, let me tell you how we are forming chain segments. So again, our policy is myopic. Every time a new pair arrives, you try to advance your chain. You try to form a new chain segment. And the way you do it is by local search, one step at a time, breaking times at random, and giving H pairs the highest priority. Let's see this in an example. Let's say a new E pair arrives. It forms these two edges between these two guys. You break ties at random. For the next one, you are going to break ties in favor of this H1. Right? Now, this is a highly suboptimal, can be highly suboptimal because you are not looking for a maximal chain, but this is practically very appealing because when you form chains, something may fail in the middle, right? So you make a chain, you make a match offer, it can fail, and then that if you have already optimized your entire chain, you have to redo this while keeping some part of the segment fixed, right? So doing this local search is actually very practically appealing. And surprisingly, we show that even though we are being suboptimal in two ways, meaning that we match myopically and we are forming suboptimal chain segments, again, this policy is going to be order optimal. Right? We also characterize the waiting time for this policy, and we do conduct comparative statics. Here, the results are not actually surprising. We show that as you bring more pairs, either type H or type E, the waiting time is actually going to go down. Right? So the last insight I want to discuss that comes from our results is basically the value of chains. So I told you at the beginning that there are markets that do not use chains because they don't have altruistic donors. Some countries, altruistic donation is not permitted, so they are legally limited. They can't do chains. But other programs, especially within US, they don't run chains simply because they don't have access to altruistic donors. They don't manage to attract altruistic donors. Now, we want to know how much those programs are going to basically lose. Or in other words, how can they compensate not having access to chains by bringing a lot more E-pairs? Let's say they have a magical way to bring more E-pairs. How many more do they need? So we're going to compare two markets. Both of them have the same arrival rate for H pairs. Market 1 matches through chains. Market 2 matches bilaterally. Now, the question we want to answer is that how many more E pairs market 2 needs to have to achieve a waiting time which is like at least as good as market 1. Okay? And we actually show using our results that the second market needs many more, right? So it needs to increase its arrival of E pairs by the total number of H pairs in order to compare.
You do two rather than one because one you need many more operation theaters open at the same time?
I do 2 instead of 1 because
if you have a long chain, everybody has to be operated at the same time, right?
If I have a long cycle, everyone needs to operate. Chain can be done non-simultaneously, right? So like,
Why would you do 2
because again, because of these people. So these people cannot do chains, right? They either cannot attract altruistic donors, okay? It's very hard to like bring people, right? But this basically says that if you want to invest, that's a good investment. Try to attract more people, right? So with that, let me just summarize. We looked at 2 ways of thickening the markets. First one was not helpful, and is actually aligned with the policy changes that happened in different programs in the past several years. The second idea, which is increasing participation, also the message here is kind of nuanced. It can have non-monotone impact depending on the composition. Right? Thank you.
A few minutes for questions.
Yes.
So in the graph, you had this portion where increasing the number of H's actually has a negative externality. Is it because that reduces the arrivals of the E's, or I'm just trying to understand why that would happen?
Because I'm not increasing E's, and if I bring more H's, they're not helping each other, right? So let's say they think about like a fixed set of people that they need to be matched with, right? I am bringing more people that are not connected with each other, right? Like in a bipartite graph.
In the bilateral matching, that does not decrease. Like that doesn't make it harder for you to find bilateral pairs, right?
We are breaking ties at random, right? So if you have more competition, the chance that you are going to be chosen at random is going to go down.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.